This video is a little different, so if listening to a radio interview isn't your thing, you might just want to switch off now. Otherwise, stay tuned and have a listen. The Isle of Man Climate Change Forum is a group of 36 citizens chosen mostly at random from around the island. There are 12 stakeholders. One's myself, the small business stakeholder, but there are other stakeholders as well for agriculture and construction and other various aspects of Isle of Man life. 12 of them were chosen at random from the electoral roll. And the other 12 were ones who had applied to be as part of the forum. So the Citizens Forum is essentially, it's a new vehicle, it's kind of experimental, and it's the very first time that Isle of Man government has actually consulted live with its citizens on a variety of topics. And this one, we talk about a different aspect of climate change in each of our sessions. We meet about once a month. Obviously, when we've had the COVID lockdowns, we've gone online, but most of the time it's in person. We've heard from the Isle of Man's specialist consultants about various aspects of climate change and climate change policy.
Okay, so what sort of do you learn from it that you then take to government? Do you then present something to the administration and say, here's what we've found, this is what we urge you to do, and how is it taken on from there?
Yeah, so the Climate Change Forum, unfortunately, doesn't have any sort of powers or any abilities to process change. So our terms of reference are broadly, we receive information from the government. We talk about one topic, that's then written up, and then that goes to the Climate Change Transformation Board. And it's the board that are responsible for making programmes and schemes and policy. So as an example, the Climate Change Forum fed into the bones of what's now become this green scheme, the Green Living Scheme, which is a way for homeowners and householders to have a certain amount paid for future improvements, insulation and that sort of thing.
Okay, and that's a part of DEFRA, I believe, isn't it? The climate change team, did you mention there? The transformation team. Yeah,
that's exactly right. So within DEFRA, you've got the Climate Change Transformation Board, which is reported to by the Climate Change Transformation Team. It's a bit of a mouthful, but now we also then have the Citizens Forum for climate change, which sort of sits underneath all of that. We sort of hear their ideas and sort of feed back to them.
Okay. How effective of a model do you think we currently have on the island in terms of approaching climate change? How long has the Citizens Forum been set up? Because it's not been too long, has it?
It's not been too long at all. And unfortunately, the timings are such that when the Citizens Forum actually reports back to Tynwald, that happens in August. We've only been going a year, but then there's a change of government. So we hope that some of the recommendations carry forward into the next Parliament, which we think that they will. The climate change bill is currently waiting for Her Majesty's signature, so that's in progress as well. And it will be up to the next government to take hold of these ideas, take hold of these policies, and do something with them.
Okay, and you mentioned this before actually we started recording about the fact that we do have a new administration coming up. How much does that play into your discussions at the Climate Change Forum, those meetings? Do you consider the different sort of candidates coming forward and how they're presenting their approach to green issues? And are you anticipating sort of a new approach to the next administration?
No, not at all. So it's been a very non-political discussion forum. However, we expect that the new candidates coming forward, a lot of them are incumbents that are standing again, will just follow the same processes, which is largely we have to do something and what are we going to do about it and what can we do about it. There are a lot of legislative changes that need to happen first before we can explore any of the fun new technologies. Things like solar and wind generation on Ireland, for example, is not economic for the MEA to provide, and the MEA can't do anything because of the Electricity Act. So the Electricity Act needs changing, and that can't be done until the climate change bill has been done. So we need legislative changes in place first, and then we can look at policies to do all kinds of other cool, new, exciting things.
Okay, and we heard sort of those statements coming out about the 2050 net zero carbon targets. I suppose you'll have more of an insight than the average person on the street as to what could actually be achieved and the way forward to approach that, I suppose. You mentioned there sort of electric vehicles, that kind of thing. What challenges are we facing?
We're actually facing a really big challenge, and predominantly climate change is here now and it's going to get worse. Unfortunately, we're a coastal community. So we're going to be impacted in the future dramatically, actually. So the latest IPCC report came out recently. Now, this is actually the sixth report from the UN IPCC. Now, bear in mind, actually, this is essentially thousands of pages of scientific evidence, which goes all the way up to the 31st of December 2020. So it's completely current. It's got all the evidence and it's quite heavy reading. But alongside with it comes an executive summary. And that executive summary essentially states that the 1.5 degree heating limit We've actually blown straight past that now. And we're looking at something more like a several degree increase. In fact, the only way we can potentially stick to 1.5 degrees C is by doing immediate and rapid decarbonisation of our economy and our infrastructure. So it's quite a lot to ask, actually. The immediate, the red warnings, it's very strong language from the IPCC, which I would say is actually ratified by 193 countries. They've read the research, they've read the executive summaries, and they've all signed off on it.
Okay, and that obviously came out this week. I believe it was Tuesday morning, or Monday morning, should I say, sorry. Right. How do you think that has changed our perspective now? Because climate, we've always had strong language around it, climate emergency, sort of over the past few years at least. Do you expect this to be ramped up now?
Yeah, so I mean, scientists will use language such as, we are concerned, or we have a high confidence level, or we think there's a low risk of this. And now they're saying that it's an existential crisis for humanity. So I think that's quite a big jump, really, from, your scientific language to, hey, we need to do something about it. In fact, we actually have very little time to do something about it. What is it exactly we're talking about when we say do something about it? Well, an increase in 1.5 degrees essentially means that we're going to start seeing more extreme weather. That kind of once in every 10 years, extreme weather event, those extreme heat waves, is going to become more common than that. Now, the trajectory we're on is heading more towards a 4-degree increase in temperatures. And what that means is we get that one freakish summer, which we have the drought and extreme weather every 50 years, where we're going to see those 39.4 times out of every 50 years. So that doesn't mean that, that means that those extreme weather reports that you guys are going to be doing on Manx Radio are going to get increasingly common as time goes on. And this is a big problem for us because we need to think about what we can do now. Otherwise, future people are going to have to think about building bigger seawalls.
Now, we have the Climate Change Citizens Forum. We have teams in DEFA. We have, obviously, green parties here on the island. But fundamentally, it's a global issue as well. How do you sort of convince the man on the street? Because we've had messages in this week saying we're a tiny island. What possible effect can we have? Where do you stand on what the island should do and our place in the world in all this?
There's 2 points you've raised there, really. The first point is, how do you convince the man on the street? Well, the government had a survey done relatively recently on attitudes to climate change. This was done a few months ago, I believe. And less people, believe that climate change is real, than it will affect our lives or is affecting our lives here than we do in the other islands. So compared to our Jersey and Guernsey, similar kind of islands, there's less people here that kind of understand the issues. About half, actually, which is quite terrifying because the policies that need to be introduced are going to affect all of our lives in every way, and everyone needs to understand why that is and potentially feed into it rather than just sort of be dragged along, which would be pretty awful. And then the second point is it's a global issue. Okay, this is true. I mean, for example, China, which is a huge polluter, but we have to remember that they're polluting building our products for us. It's the West that's essentially purchases the products which then have to be made in a foreign jurisdiction, and they're polluting, and then we point the blame at them and say, hey, why don't they change? It is actually us. We're the end consumers. I'm looking at places like Australia, America, Canada, Europe, Great Britain, and therefore the Isle of Man.
And of course, mass sort of pollution is caused by industry, most of all. But like I say, the man on the street might say, well, what can I do at home base? What do you personally sort of suggest people do if they're concerned about climate change, but not sure what effect they can have on tackling this issue?
Well, if I could just expand that a little bit, there's kind of 3 areas. There's the government, which we've already discussed. There's business, which has dramatic opportunities in green investment. There's a business in the north of the island that's installed the island's largest renewable infrastructure, and that's saving them an absolute bomb on their electricity bills. They're also occasionally exporting green energy, which the rest of us benefit from. And then lastly, we have individuals. And if this report's going out before election time, then the most important thing you can do, the biggest impact you can have, is to speak to your MHK. Speak to your MLCs as well, prospective MLCs. Speak to all the politicians that you have, If you don't know your local politician, ask someone to help you out. They all need to be aware this is probably the biggest, most pressing issue. The change that needs to happen immediately from now to the next sort of 5 years, which coincides quite beautifully with the next Parliament. It really is on them to make a stand and put their best foot forward. There's also opportunity, which unfortunately we're losing on the island as the first mover. all of our neighbours are doing some incredible things. In Ireland, for example, new builds, they're all completely clean. They all have clean heating sources. So they use air source heat pumps, for example, instead of fossil fuel, which is great for tenants. It's great for anyone that moves into one of these houses. They're going to have low bills. And we don't have that here yet. These are the sorts of things that we need to be doing and thinking about.
What do you think people can do then to make sure that the next administration represents them? What anything you'd recommend doing at this point?
Not in general, but on a specific note, the MHKs, broadly speaking, recently voted to not reduce the time frame from 2050 to 2035. There were 7 who voted to reduce it. It would be worth you speaking to your MHK to ask either why they were in favour or why they weren't. A few that weren't in favour have said, okay, this is because we've got bigger issues, we shouldn't just change the title, there's more to look at. Well, that is true, but we don't have till 2050, we don't really have until 2035. And as an island, we actually benefit from renewable infrastructure that's being deployed in the UK, for example. This gives us greener energy through our interconnector. There are some businesses on the island that pay a little bit extra to have purely green energy. But obviously the energy we produce on island is problematic in that it's quite dirty, and we may no longer be able to export it to the UK, which means we have to change. This isn't something we can ignore. We actually have to change because the UK won't be able to accept our energy. And if we're not storing it or using it, we have to do something with it. So there's some big changes ahead, and please get involved in the conversation. It's really important that everyone on the Isle of Man is involved. Just because we need to make sure that whatever happens in the future is safe, and it's what the government call a just transition. But the only way it can be a just transition is if people add their voices to the conversation and the debate.